The sound woke me at exactly 3:17 a.m. Not a crash or a cry, but something worse. My husband's voice, steady and deliberate, coaching our children through a script I wasn't supposed to hear. Through the thin walls of our Phoenix ranch house, I heard him say, "When Grandma asks, you tell her you miss her, okay? Say it like you mean it." Our 8-year-old daughter's sleepy voice repeated the words. That was the moment everything shattered. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me take you back to 3 months earlier, when I still believed in the life we'd built. We lived in a modest neighborhood near Camelback Mountain, the kind of place where everyone waves from their driveways and kids ride bikes until sunset. I thought we had everything. Mark worked in commercial real estate, always on his phone, always networking. I'd been a teacher for 23 years before retiring early to help raise our grandkids while our daughter worked. That's what families do, right? They sacrifice for each other. I believed that with every fiber of my being. Mark had this way of making decisions seem collaborative when they were anything but. "Honey, what do you think about lending my brother some money for his startup?" He'd ask over dinner, already knowing I'd say yes. Or, "The kids need new tablets for school. Can we pull from your savings?" It was always framed as a question, but the answer was predetermined. Over the years, I'd handed over chunks of my retirement fund, my inheritance from my mother, even the small nest egg I'd built from tutoring on weekends. Looking back now, I can see how it happened in increments. 1,000 here, 5,000 there. He had access to my accounts because we were married, because that's what trust looked like. Or so I thought. The numbers in my savings dwindled from comfortable to concerning, but whenever I brought it up, Mark had a perfectly reasonable explanation. His brother's business would pay us back with interest. The kids' education was an investment. We were building our future together. The first real crack appeared during a family barbecue at his brother Tom's new house in Scottsdale. New house. That registered somewhere in the back of my mind, but I pushed it aside. Tom was grilling steaks that cost more than our weekly grocery budget, and his wife showed off renovations that must have run into 6 figures. I caught Mark's eye across the patio, expecting to share a moment of mutual surprise at their sudden wealth. But instead, he looked away quickly. Too quickly. That night, I couldn't sleep. I lay there listening to Mark's steady breathing and felt something cold settle in my chest. When had Tom paid back that loan? Had he paid it back at all? I told myself I was being paranoid, that marriage required trust, that suspicion was poison. Besides, what could I do? I was 62 years old. I'd given up my career. Where would I even start? Have you ever felt that? That moment when your gut screams one thing, but your mind constructs elaborate defenses to silence it? I convinced myself I was overreacting. Mark had always provided. We had a roof over our heads, food on the table. What right did I have to complain about money that was technically ours anyway? This is what I told myself. This is how I stayed blind. The truth is, I'd become a ghost in my own life. My opinions at family dinners got talked over. My suggestions for weekend plans were politely dismissed. When had I last made a decision that mattered? When had anyone last asked what I wanted? I'd accepted that this was just what happened after decades of marriage. You become background noise, furniture that's always been there and never questioned. I started noticing other things. Mark spent more time with the kids than with me, which should have made me happy. Isn't that what good fathers do? But there was something performative about it, something calculated. He'd take them for ice cream without asking if I wanted to come. He'd plan movie nights and conveniently forget to mention them until I walked in on them already settled on the couch. "Oh, we didn't want to disturb you," he'd say. "You look tired." I was tired. Tired of feeling like I was fading, like someone had turned down my volume until I could barely hear myself anymore. But I thought this was just age, just the natural progression of a long marriage. I thought I was supposed to be grateful for a husband who still came home every night, who didn't drink or gamble or chase other women. The bar I'd set for happiness had become so low I could step over it without noticing. Our daughter Sarah started coming by less frequently. When she did visit, she'd hug her father first, longer, warmer. The kids would run to him while I got an obligatory kiss on the cheek. I told myself children always favored the fun parent, that I was being oversensitive. But there was something in Sarah's eyes when she looked at me, something like pity mixed with impatience, that made my stomach turn. The financial situation kept nagging at me despite my efforts to ignore it. One afternoon, while Mark was at work, I finally logged into our bank accounts. I'd avoided looking for months, maybe longer. The numbers on the screen didn't make sense at first. My retirement account, the one that had held over $200,000 from my mother's estate and my own savings, now showed a balance of $14,000. I sat there staring at the screen until my vision blurred. My hands shook so badly I had to grip the edge of the desk. This couldn't be right. There had to be some mistake, some transfer I'd forgotten about. But as I scrolled through the transaction history, the pattern became undeniable. Withdrawals, transfers, always to accounts I didn't recognize, always for amounts that seemed just small enough to escape notice until you added them up and realized everything was gone. The room felt too small suddenly, the walls pressing in. I thought about confronting Mark immediately, but something stopped me. Maybe it was fear. Maybe it was the sick certainty that he'd have an explanation, that he'd make me feel stupid for questioning him, that he'd turn this around until I was apologizing for doubting his judgment. I'd seen him do it before. That smooth pivot from defense to offense that left you wondering how you became the villain. I printed out 6 months of statements before I could second-guess myself. My hands trembled so much that the first 3 pages came out crooked, but I didn't care. I needed physical evidence, something I could hold on to when he inevitably tried to convince me I was confused or mistaken. Each page that emerged from the printer felt like another piece of my denial crumbling away. I spread the statements across the dining room table, arranging them chronologically. The pattern was clear once you knew to look for it. Transfers on the 15th of every month, always to an account ending in 7743. Sometimes $2,000, sometimes $5,000, once even $10,000. I did the math on the back of an envelope, my elementary school teacher handwriting shaky and uncertain. Over $60,000 in 6 months alone. $60,000 to an account I'd never heard of. My mother had died believing that money would secure my future. She'd worked 2 jobs for 40 years, lived frugally, saved every penny so her only daughter would never struggle, and I'd let it slip away without even noticing. The shame of that realization burned hotter than the anger. What kind of woman lets her entire inheritance vanish and doesn't even realize it's happening? I sat at that table until the afternoon sun shifted and the papers fell into shadow. I kept expecting to feel something dramatic, rage, betrayal, heartbreak. Instead, I just felt tired, bone-deep tired, the kind of exhaustion that comes from finally admitting something you've known for a long time, but refused to acknowledge. My marriage wasn't what I thought it was. Maybe it never had been. When I heard Mark's car in the driveway, I gathered the statements quickly, stuffed them in a folder, and hid it in the back of my closet behind winter clothes he never touched. My heart pounded as I heard his key in the lock, like I was the one doing something wrong. Isn't that twisted? I'd just discovered massive financial fraud, and I was the one feeling guilty. That night at dinner, I watched him differently. He told a funny story about a client, made the kids laugh, asked Sarah about her day with genuine interest. He was so good at this, so natural. How could someone who looked this normal, this caring, have systematically drained my life savings? But he had. The numbers didn't lie, even if everything else did. I started sleeping poorly. Not just the normal restlessness of getting older, but real insomnia, the kind where you lie awake, running through scenarios until dawn breaks and you're exhausted before the day even starts. I'd replay conversations, looking for clues I'd missed. I'd calculate how much money had disappeared and where it might have gone. I'd imagine confronting Mark and script out every possible response he might give. Do you know what the worst part was? I blamed myself for being too trusting, too passive, too old and irrelevant to matter anymore. I thought maybe I deserved this for being so stupid, for not paying attention, for letting my guard down. That's what they do to you, the people who manipulate. They make you complicit in your own destruction. They make you believe you earned the betrayal. 3 weeks after discovering the missing money, I was folding laundry in the living room when Mark's phone buzzed on the coffee table. He was in the shower. I wasn't trying to snoop. I really wasn't, but the message preview was right there on the locked screen, from Sarah. Did you talk to her about the condo yet? My daughter, talking to my husband, about something I apparently didn't know about, something involving a condo. My fingers moved before my brain could stop them. I knew Mark's passcode because we'd never hidden things from each other, or so I'd believed. His messages with Sarah went back months, plans, discussions about my money, my health, my future. They talked about me like I was a problem to be solved, an obstacle to be managed. Sarah had written, "I think she's getting suspicious. We need to move faster." And Mark had responded, "Don't worry, she won't do anything. She never does." That's when I started to understand. This wasn't just about money. This was about replacement. They were building a future that didn't include me, using my resources to fund it, coaching the grandkids to shift their loyalty, preparing everyone for my absence while I was still very much present. I was being erased from my own life, and I'd been too resigned to fight it. I put the phone back exactly where I'd found it and finished folding the laundry with hands that wouldn't stop trembling. When Mark came out of the bathroom, I smiled and asked what he wanted for dinner. He never knew, not then. I'd spent so long being invisible that playing the role came naturally. But something had shifted inside me. That cold thing in my chest wasn't fear anymore. It was rage, clean and clarifying, waiting for the right moment to surface. The kids came over the next Sunday, like they did every week. I watched Mark with them differently now. Every inside joke, every whispered conversation, every time he pulled them aside, I saw it all through new eyes. He was building alliances, creating a version of our family where I was optional. And they were all participating, even my precious grandchildren who I'd sacrificed so much to help raise. After they left, I asked Mark about the condo. I kept my voice light, curious. "Sarah mentioned something about a condo?" He didn't even flinch. "Oh, just an investment property we're looking at. I didn't want to bother you with the details." He smiled that smile I'd once found charming. Now it looked like a mask. "You know how complicated these things get." I nodded and let it drop, but I'd learned what I needed to know. He was still lying, still assuming I was too powerless to challenge him, and maybe he was right. What could I do? I was 62 with dwindling savings and no real power in my own home. The resignation I'd felt for so long threatened to swallow me whole. But then something happened that changed everything. It was 3:17 a.m. when I woke to those voices. Mark, coaching our granddaughter through what to say. Teaching her to perform, missing me before I was even gone. That sacred line, teaching kids to lie, to manipulate their own emotions. That was the moment the last thread holding me to my old life snapped. I lay there in the dark, listening to my husband shape my grandchildren into accomplices, and I felt something I hadn't felt in years. I felt powerful, because now I knew exactly what I was dealing with. Now I could plan. Now I could fight back. The woman who had resigned herself to fading away was gone. What rose in her place was someone who had nothing left to lose and everything to reclaim. The next morning, I made coffee and smiled at Mark like nothing had changed. But everything had changed. I just wasn't ready to show my hand yet, because I'd learned something important from all those years of being overlooked. When people think you're powerless, they get careless. And careless people make mistakes. I just needed to be patient enough to catch them. I started keeping a notebook, nothing digital, nothing that could be hacked or discovered through shared cloud accounts. A physical spiral notebook hidden in the back of my closet behind shoeboxes Mark never touched. I documented everything: dates, times, conversations, transactions. When Mark said he was working late, I noted it. When Sarah called him instead of me, I wrote it down. When the kids left with him for special grandpa time, I recorded every detail. It felt ridiculous at first, like I was playing detective in my own marriage. But the pattern that emerged was undeniable. This wasn't paranoia. This was orchestrated. Every family gathering had purpose. Every conversation was calculated. They were building something, and I was the foundation they planned to bury it on. I also started researching. Late at night, when Mark was asleep, I'd use my tablet to learn about financial abuse, elder manipulation, coercive control. That's when I discovered that almost 1 in 6 nursing home residents report experiencing abuse. 1 in 6. I wasn't in a nursing home, but I was in a home where I was being systematically isolated and exploited. The terminology shocked me. Financial exploitation, emotional manipulation, deliberate replacement. These weren't just things that happened to other people. They were happening to me. The hardest part was acting normal, smiling through family dinners, nodding along with Mark's plans, pretending I didn't see the way everyone looked at me, like I was already a memory instead of a person sitting right there. But I did it, because I needed them to think I was still that passive woman who'd never challenged them. 2 weeks after that 3 a.m. revelation, Mark's brother Tom showed up unexpectedly. Mark was out, supposedly meeting a client. Tom looked uncomfortable, shifting his weight in our doorway like he wanted to run. "Can I come in?" he asked. "I need to talk to you." We sat in the kitchen, and Tom couldn't meet my eyes. He started 3 different sentences before finally blurting out, "I can't do this anymore. What Mark's doing, what we're all doing, it's not right." The floodgates opened. Tom told me everything. The investment property wasn't an investment. It was a condo Mark and Sarah were planning to move into together, funded entirely by my money. The idea was that I'd be too confused to manage on my own, that I'd need care, that they'd sell our house and put me somewhere appropriate. I sat there listening to my brother-in-law describe my planned future like he was reading a business proposal. They'd even discussed which facility would be cheapest. Not best, cheapest. Tom's guilt was genuine, but it didn't erase his complicity. "I thought you should know," he finished. "I couldn't live with myself if I didn't tell you." After he left, I sat at that kitchen table for a long time. The afternoon sun slanted through the windows, highlighting dust motes floating in the air. I thought about all those years of marriage, of trust, of believing we were a team. I thought about the money, yes. But more than that, I thought about the erasure. They were trying to delete me from my own story, and they'd almost succeeded. That night when Mark came home, I was making dinner like always. He kissed my cheek like always. We ate and watched television like always. But I wasn't the same woman I'd been that morning. Tom's confession had given me something precious. Confirmation that I wasn't crazy. That my instincts had been right. That the life I thought I was losing hadn't been real in the first place. I reached out to a friend I'd lost touch with over the years. Linda had gone through something similar with her own husband. Not identical, but close enough that she recognized the signs when I finally opened up. We met for coffee at a little place near South Mountain, somewhere Mark would never think to look for me. Linda listened without judgment as everything poured out. "You need proof," she said finally. "Documentation. Because when you confront this, he's going to deny everything, and everyone's going to believe him unless you have evidence." She'd been through it herself, documented her way to freedom, clawed back control of her life. Did you know that research shows 38% of people hide money to maintain financial privacy? Linda had discovered her husband's secret accounts only through meticulous record-keeping. She helped me make a plan. We'd meet weekly, go over everything I'd documented, strategize next steps. For the first time in months, I didn't feel alone. Linda understood what it was like to be made invisible, to fight your way back to being seen. "You're not powerless," she told me. "You've never been powerless. You've just been convinced that you are. There's a difference." Those weekly meetings with Linda became my lifeline. We'd sit in her small apartment, papers spread across her coffee table, and she'd help me see patterns I'd missed. She taught me how to screenshot text messages without leaving a trace, how to access Mark's email using the family computer, how to gather evidence without raising suspicion. It felt like learning a new language, the language of survival. When my ex tried to hide assets, he thought I was too stupid to notice, Linda told me during our third meeting. He'd used words like amortization and equity dilution to confuse me, make me feel like I couldn't possibly understand finances. But money is just numbers, and numbers don't lie. She showed me how to read bank statements, how to track money flows, how to identify shell companies and hidden accounts. I learned that Mark had been more sophisticated than I'd initially thought. He hadn't just withdrawn money, he'd created an entire parallel financial structure. Limited liability companies in his brother's name. Investment accounts with me listed as a co-owner, but without access. Credit cards that generated statements to his office email, not our home address. The scope of the deception was staggering. Linda helped me process the emotional weight of it, too. Some afternoons, we'd abandon the paperwork and just talk. About feeling stupid, about grieving marriages that never really existed, about the specific loneliness of being betrayed by your own family. "People think financial abuse isn't as bad as other kinds," she said once. "But they're wrong. When someone steals your resources, they're stealing your future. They're stealing your ability to escape, to choose, to survive. That's not less than abuse. That's the foundation of all abuse." She was right. Every dollar Mark had taken wasn't just money. It was a day I might need care and couldn't afford it. It was independence I'd never have. It was security I'd worked my entire life to build, evaporated by someone who promised to protect me. The betrayal went so much deeper than numbers on a screen. I started gathering evidence more aggressively. Bank statements, emails, text messages, anything I could access without raising suspicion. I learned that Mark had opened credit cards in my name, taken out loans against our house, moved money through accounts I'd never known existed. The scope of the betrayal was staggering. This wasn't impulsive or accidental. This was systematic theft spanning years. But the financial abuse was only part of it. What cut deeper was the emotional manipulation. I found messages where Sarah and Mark discussed managing me, handling my moods, keeping me calm and cooperative. They talked about me like I was a difficult pet, not a person. My own daughter had written, "She's easier to deal with when she thinks everything is her idea." They'd been gaslighting me for so long, I'd started to believe my own irrelevance. One afternoon, I was supposed to be at a doctor's appointment. Instead, I was parked outside the bank where Mark and Tom did business. I watched Mark go in alone, stay for 40 minutes, come out with Tom, both of them laughing about something. That casual laughter while they robbed me felt like a physical blow. These were the men in my life, the ones who were supposed to protect me. The documentation became my lifeline. Every new piece of evidence was a brick in the wall I was building between my old life and whatever came next. I photocopied documents at the library. I forwarded emails to an account Mark didn't know about. I took pictures of bank statements with my phone before he could hide them. I became methodical, strategic, someone I didn't recognize but desperately needed to be. And through it all, I kept smiling, kept cooking dinner, kept pretending everything was fine. The performance exhausted me, but it was necessary, because I was planning something they'd never see coming. These people who thought I was too old, too tired, too resigned to fight back. They had no idea what was building in the silence they'd created around me. Linda introduced me to a lawyer who specialized in elder financial abuse. "Elder abuse," I repeated, tasting the words. I was 62. I didn't feel elderly, but the law was clear. Exploitation of anyone over 60 qualified. And I definitely qualified. The lawyer, a sharp woman named Patricia, who reminded me of who I used to be before marriage dulled my edges, reviewed my documentation. "This is good," she said, spreading papers across her desk. "This is really good. You have a strong case." She explained my options, legal pathways, protections available. For every year of marriage, there were safeguards I'd never known existed: community property laws, fraud statutes, fiduciary duty violations. The law recognized what had been done to me even if my family didn't. But Patricia warned me about something else. "You need to understand that pressing charges, filing lawsuits, that tears families apart. Are you prepared for that?" I thought about Sarah, about my grandchildren, about the life I'd imagined having with them. Then I thought about being erased, about dying in some cheap facility while they lived in my dream home, funded by my money. "Yes," I told Patricia, "I'm prepared." Patricia's office became another sanctuary. She never rushed me, never made me feel stupid for the questions I asked. During our second meeting, she walked me through worst-case and best-case scenarios. "In Arizona, we have strong community property laws," she explained. "Everything acquired during the marriage is owned 50-50, regardless of whose name is on the account. But proving fraud, proving he deliberately deceived you, that could get you more." She showed me cases similar to mine. Other women, mostly older, who'd discovered their spouses had been systematically draining joint accounts. Some had won. Some had lost everything fighting in court against husbands with better lawyers and hidden assets. "The system isn't always fair," Patricia admitted. "Especially to women your age. Judges sometimes have unconscious biases. They might see you as vindictive or confused rather than as a victim seeking justice." "So, what do I do?" I asked, feeling that old helplessness creeping back in. "You fight smart," Patricia said. "You document everything, which you're already doing. You don't tip your hand until we're ready to file. And you decide what outcome you actually want. Because revenge and justice aren't always the same thing, and you need to be clear about which one you're after." I thought about that for a long time. What did I want? I wanted my money back, obviously. I wanted Mark to face consequences for what he'd done. But more than that, I wanted acknowledgement. I wanted Sarah to look me in the eye and admit she'd helped her father rob her own mother. I wanted my grandchildren to know the truth. I wanted everyone who'd dismissed and erased me to see that I was still here, still fighting, still mattering. "I want them to know they didn't break me," I told Patricia. "I want them to know they failed." She smiled then, a fierce expression that made her look younger. "Then let's make sure they know." We spent the next hour crafting strategy. Patricia recommended I open a new bank account at a different institution, one Mark had no connection to. "Start directing any income there, even if it's just Social Security or small amounts. You need a financial foundation he can't touch." She also suggested I get a credit freeze to prevent Mark from opening anything else in my name. The plan crystallized over the following weeks. I would confront Mark, but not privately where he could manipulate and gaslight me into backing down. It needed to be public, witnessed, undeniable. Linda suggested our neighborhood's annual block party. "Everyone will be there," she said. "Your family, your neighbors, the whole community. He won't be able to control the narrative if there are 100 witnesses." The block party was in 3 weeks. I had that long to get everything in order, to make copies of copies, to secure documents in places Mark couldn't access, to prepare myself mentally for what I was about to do. Because once I did this, there was no going back. The life I'd known, however illusory, would be over. But staying meant disappearing entirely, and I'd come too far to accept that fate. I practiced what I'd say. Standing in front of the bathroom mirror while Mark was at work, I rehearsed the words until they felt natural, powerful. "You took everything from me and thought I'd never notice because you'd convinced me I didn't matter." I'd say it looking him in the eye, making sure everyone heard, making sure there was no misunderstanding about what had happened. Sarah called one evening to announce she was pregnant. My first grandchild from her, a baby I should have been ecstatic about. Instead, all I could think was that this child would be raised on stolen money, taught the same manipulative tactics, brought into a family built on lies. "That's wonderful, honey," I said, my voice hollow. After we hung up, I cried for the first time in weeks, not for myself, but for that baby who'd be born into this dysfunction. The pregnancy announcement added another layer of complexity to everything. This baby growing inside my daughter was my grandchild. An innocent life that had nothing to do with the war I was about to wage. Would I ever meet this child? Would Sarah cut me off completely once I exposed what they'd done? The thought of missing this baby's life, first steps, first words, birthdays and holidays, made my chest ache with anticipatory grief. But then I'd remember the text messages, the cold calculation in how they'd discussed my future, the way Sarah had written about moving faster before I got suspicious. My daughter was carrying new life while actively participating in erasing mine. The irony was almost too painful to bear. I called Linda that night, crying so hard I could barely speak. "What if I'm making a mistake?" I asked. "What if I should just let it go, try to repair things, think about the baby?" "Let me ask you something," Linda said gently. "If you stay silent now, if you let them get away with this, what are you teaching that baby? What kind of world are you bringing that child into? One where it's okay to steal from family, where the weak get trampled and everyone looks the other way?" She was right. I knew she was right. But knowing didn't make it hurt less. The night before the block party, I couldn't sleep, not from fear, but from anticipation. Tomorrow, everything would change. Tomorrow, I would stop being invisible. I thought about all the women who never get this moment, who fade away without fighting back, who die still believing they deserved their erasure. I was fighting for them too, in a way, for everyone who'd ever been made to feel powerless in their own home. I got up around 2 a.m. and went to my closet. I pulled out the folder with all my documentation, the notebook with my observations, the printouts of bank statements and text messages. I spread them across the bed and looked at them in the dim light from the hallway. This was my truth, physical and undeniable. Whatever happened tomorrow, I had proof. I had evidence. I had reality on my side. I thought about my mother, about all those years she'd worked to give me security, about how she'd died believing I'd be taken care of. I whispered into the darkness, "I'm sorry I let him take it, Mom. But I'm getting it back. I promise you, I'm fighting back." It felt important to say it out loud, to make that promise to someone, even if she was long gone. Mark stirred in his sleep, and I quickly gathered the papers, tucked them back into hiding. I slid back into bed beside him. This man I'd shared my life with for decades. This stranger who'd been systematically destroying me. His breathing was steady, peaceful. He had no idea what was coming. And that felt like the tiniest bit of power in a situation where I'd had none for so long. Mark noticed something was different. "You seem distracted," he said over breakfast. I smiled and told him I was just thinking about the party. "I'm actually looking forward to it," I said, which was true, though not for the reasons he'd assume. He squeezed my hand, this man who'd stolen years and money and dignity from me, and I let him, knowing it would be one of the last times he'd touch me. The block party started at noon. Our street was blocked off, tables set up with food, kids running around, neighbors chatting and laughing. It could have been any summer Saturday in Phoenix, ordinary and pleasant and safe. Mark worked the crowd like he always did, charming and friendly, the perfect neighbor. Sarah showed up with her husband and the kids. Everything looked so normal. I waited until mid-afternoon when the crowd was biggest and everyone was relaxed. Linda stood nearby, ready to support me. Patricia was there too, not as my lawyer but as a friend, someone else who knew the truth. I walked to the center of the street where everyone could see me. Mark noticed first, confusion crossing his face. "What are you doing?" he called out. I took a deep breath. My hands were shaking, but my voice came out steady and clear. "I need everyone to hear something," I said loudly. Conversation stopped. People turned. In the sudden quiet, I could hear children playing 2 houses down, oblivious to what was about to happen. "My name is Catherine, and I've lived on this street for 20 years. Most of you know me as Mark's wife, as Sarah's mother, as the grandmother who helps with the kids. But there's something you don't know. For the past several years, my husband has been systematically stealing from me." Mark's face went white, then red. "Catherine, what are you—" "Let me finish," I cut him off, surprised by the strength in my voice. "I'm 62 years old. I worked as a teacher for 23 years. I retired early to help raise my grandchildren while my daughter worked. I thought I was doing what families do, sacrificing for each other. But while I was sacrificing, my husband was stealing." I pulled out the bank statements I'd tucked into my jacket pocket. "My mother left me $200,000 when she died. She worked 2 jobs for 40 years to leave me that security. Today that account has $14,000 in it. The rest has been transferred, without my knowledge or consent, to accounts I was never told about." People were staring now, some at me, some at Mark, who looked like he wanted to run. Sarah stood frozen near the food table, her hand protectively over her pregnant belly. I felt a flash of regret. This was her baby shower weekend, and I was destroying it. But I pushed the feeling aside. She'd made her choices. Now she had to face them. "But it's not just about money," I continued, my voice gaining momentum. "It's about being erased from my own life, about discovering that my husband and my daughter have been planning my future without me, about overhearing my husband coaching my grandchildren to say they miss me, practicing for when I'm gone, even though I'm still here." I looked directly at Mark then. "At 3 a.m. 2 months ago, I heard you teaching Emma to say she missed me. She's 8 years old, and you were giving her lines like she's in a play, preparing her for my absence while I was sleeping 20 feet away." The silence was absolute. Someone's paper plate blew across the street in the hot breeze, the scraping sound unnaturally loud. Mrs. Rodriguez from 3 doors down had tears in her eyes. The Henderson kids stared with open mouths. Mark finally found his voice. "She's confused," he said, that smooth charm sliding back into place. "This is what happens sometimes with—" "With what?" I challenged. "With women my age? Is that what you were going to say? That I'm old and confused and don't understand my own finances?" I held up my phone. "I have text messages between you and Sarah discussing which nursing home would be cheapest. Not which would provide the best care for me, but which would cost you the least money. My money, incidentally. The money you stole." Sarah made a small sound, almost a whimper. Her husband turned to look at her, questions clear on his face. He didn't know. Of course he didn't know. Sarah had kept him in the dark, just like Mark had kept me. And then I told them. Everything. The missing money, the secret accounts, the plans to discard me, the coaching of the children. Every detail I'd documented, every lie I'd uncovered, laid out in the bright Phoenix sunshine where everyone could hear. Some people looked shocked, others looked uncomfortable, but they all listened. Mark tried to interrupt, to charm his way out, to make me sound confused or senile. But I had copies of bank statements in my hands, printouts of text messages, documentation of every single betrayal. "Show them the condo purchase agreement," I said to Sarah. "Tell everyone how you plan to sell our house and put me in the cheapest facility you could find. Tell them how you discussed whether I'd even notice I was being robbed." Sarah's face went white. The kids stared at their mother, confused. Tom looked at the ground, guilt written across his features. And Mark. Mark tried to play the victim, the confused husband with the unstable wife. But the evidence spoke louder than his charm. I'd made sure of that. "Everything she's saying is crazy," Mark protested, looking around for support. "But our neighbors knew me. They'd known me for 20 years. They'd watched me teach their children, volunteer at schools, organize community events. Crazy wasn't a word that fit, and the documents in my hands were very, very sane. Linda stepped forward then, standing beside me in a show of solidarity. "I went through something similar," she announced to the crowd. "My ex-husband drained my accounts and told everyone I was having a breakdown when I discovered it. But Catherine isn't confused. She's been documenting everything and she has proof. Real, legal proof." The confrontation didn't last much longer, maybe 10 more minutes from that point. But in that time, I reclaimed everything they'd tried to take from me: my voice, my story, my dignity. Mark kept trying to get me alone, to talk privately, which we both knew meant where he could manipulate me. I refused. "Anything you have to say to me, you can say in front of everyone here," I told him. He couldn't, because the truth only works in darkness, and I dragged everything into the light. I told him our marriage was over. I told him I'd filed for legal separation and protective orders. I told him he had 24 hours to move out of our house or I'd have him removed. The look on his face, shock giving way to rage, giving way to calculation, told me everything I needed to know about who he really was. People started leaving soon after, the party atmosphere destroyed. Some neighbors hugged me, told me they were sorry, offered support. Mrs. Rodriguez whispered, "I had a feeling something wasn't right, but I didn't want to pry." Mr. Chen from the corner house pressed a business card into my hand. His cousin was a lawyer who specialized in elder law. Even the uncomfortable witnesses, the ones who'd rather have stayed ignorant, couldn't unsee what I'd shown them. Others avoided eye contact, uncomfortable with the messiness of truth. The Johnsons gathered their kids quickly and left without saying goodbye. The Patels looked embarrassed, like I'd committed some social faux pas by exposing abuse at a neighborhood party. I didn't care about them. I cared that I'd done it. I'd spoken my truth in front of everyone who mattered. There would be no rewriting this story, no twisting it into something else. Sarah confronted me afterward, her face blotchy with tears and anger. "How could you humiliate us like that?" she demanded. Not "I'm sorry." Not "I didn't realize what we were doing to you." Just anger that I'd exposed them. "How could you steal from me?" I replied. "How could you teach my grandchildren to lie to me? How could you plan to warehouse me so you could take everything I've worked for?" She had no answer, because there was no good answer. What they'd done was indefensible, and making it public didn't change that. It just made it impossible to hide. Sarah left with her family, the kids confused and upset, and I watched them go knowing I might never see them again. That possibility hurt worse than anything Mark had done. But you know what? It wasn't fair. It wasn't fair that Mark faced no legal consequences because he'd been clever enough to make everything technically legal, if morally bankrupt. It wasn't fair that he'd likely convince parts of our family that I was the problem, that I'd overreacted, that this was all some menopausal breakdown. It wasn't fair that I'd lost my daughter along with my marriage. Do you think that was fair? Tell me in the comments, what would you have done in my place? Because sitting here now, I still don't know if I made the right choice. I won the battle but lost the war in some ways. My grandchildren growing up without me, being told some version of events that paints me as the villain. That thought keeps me awake at night. The legal process took months. Mark hired an expensive lawyer and fought me on everything: property division, asset distribution, even my right to half the equity in our home. But I had Patricia, and I had documentation, and slowly, painfully, I clawed back some of what was mine. Not all. Some money was gone forever, hidden in ways I couldn't prove. But enough. Enough to survive. The house sold. I bought a small condo near downtown Phoenix, nothing fancy but mine, all mine. No shared accounts, no one with access to my finances but me. I decorated it exactly how I wanted, colors Mark would have vetoed, furniture he would have found impractical. Every choice felt like an act of rebellion, of reclamation. Linda helped me through the worst of it. The lonely nights, the moments of doubt, the times I almost called Mark just to hear a familiar voice. "That's not him you're missing," she'd remind me. "That's the illusion of him. The real him was willing to destroy you for money." She was right, but that didn't make the grief any less real. I started volunteering at a local women's shelter. Not as a victim, but as someone who'd survived and could help others see the patterns I'd missed for so long. I met women who'd had it worse: physical abuse, threats, children used as weapons. But I also met women in situations eerily similar to mine: financial exploitation, isolation disguised as care, families complicit in their erasure. One woman, Maria, was 58. Her son and his wife had moved in to help after her husband died, and within a year they'd drained her accounts and were trying to get power of attorney. She came to me confused, doubting herself, convinced she was being paranoid. I showed her my documentation, explained what I'd learned. "You're not crazy," I told her. "You're being abused." Helping Maria, helping others like her. That became my purpose. That became how I transformed what happened from a tragedy into something meaningful. I couldn't get back the years I'd lost, couldn't repair the family relationships that had shattered. But I could use my experience to protect others. I could be the person I'd wished for when I was drowning in denial. Sometimes I see Sarah around town. She doesn't acknowledge me. The grandchildren are growing up without me, learning to ride bikes and losing teeth and starting school, and I'm not part of any of it. That pain is constant, a low-level ache that never quite goes away. But I remind myself that the alternative was worse. The alternative was disappearing entirely. Mark remarried, I heard. Someone younger. Someone who probably has no idea what she's getting into. I feel bad for her, but I also know she won't listen if I try to warn her. No one ever believes it until they live it. Tom occasionally sends apologetic texts that I don't respond to. His guilt is his problem, not mine. I don't have energy for other people's discomfort with their own choices. Life is quieter now, smaller, but it's mine. I wake up when I want, eat what I want, spend my money how I want. No one questions my decisions or makes me feel stupid for having opinions. The trade-off, loneliness for autonomy, was worth it. I'm learning that the hard way, day by day, in a condo that echoes sometimes but never lies. Before I end my story, I want to share something important I learned through all of this. Something that could save you or someone you love from what I went through. It's about recognizing these patterns in yourself before it's too late. Financial abuse in relationships is insidious because it happens gradually. Small requests that seem reasonable, joint accounts that feel like trust, access that feels like partnership but becomes control. I want you to ask yourself some specific questions, and I want you to be honest with your answers because denial is how they win. Do you know how much money is in your accounts right now? Not roughly, exactly. If you can't answer that, find out today. Do you have access to all financial documents, or does your partner handle everything? Can you make purchases without explaining or justifying them? Have you been asked to sign documents you don't fully understand? These aren't random questions. These are warning signs. Here's what I learned too late. In cases of elder financial abuse, the average victim loses over $120,000 before discovering the theft. $120,000. I lost more than that. But beyond the money, what I lost was years of autonomy, of decision-making power, of believing I mattered. The isolation piece is crucial. When did you last make plans without consulting your partner? When did you last see friends without them present? Have family members commented on how much you've changed? Abusers don't usually lock you in a room. They make you want to stay there. They make outside relationships feel like too much work. Like everyone else, just doesn't understand. And the manipulation. If you find yourself constantly apologizing for things that aren't your fault, if you second-guess every decision, if you feel like you're losing your mind because your reality doesn't match what you're being told, that's gaslighting. That's abuse. Your instincts are probably right even when you're being told they're wrong. One statistic haunts me. Studies show that financial abuse occurs in 99% of domestic violence cases. 99%. But it also occurs in relationships without physical violence. It's a form of control that transcends hitting or screaming. It's quiet. It's legal in many forms, and it destroys lives just as effectively as any other kind of abuse. So what do you do if you recognize these patterns? First, document everything. Start a private record: dates, amounts, conversations. Keep it somewhere safe, somewhere they can't access. Open a bank account in your name only if you don't have one. Even a small emergency fund can be life-saving. Second, talk to someone outside the situation: a friend, a therapist, a financial advisor. Break the isolation. Abusers rely on you having no outside perspective because outside perspectives see through their lies. Find your Linda. Find someone who can reflect back reality when you're being told you're crazy. Third, know your legal rights. Every state has laws about marital property, about financial fraud, about elder abuse. Consult with a lawyer confidentially. Many offer free initial consultations. Just knowing your options can shift your perspective from helpless to strategic. And maybe most importantly, trust yourself. If something feels wrong, it probably is. You're not too old to start over. You're not too tired to fight. You're not too powerless to reclaim your life. Those are lies told by people who benefit from your surrender. The truth is, you have more power than they want you to believe. To anyone listening who's going through something similar, I see you. I know the fear, the confusion, the exhaustion of pretending everything is fine when it's all falling apart. I know what it's like to love someone who's hurting you, to want to believe the lies because the truth is unbearable. But you deserve better. You deserve autonomy and respect, and a life that's actually yours. And to those of you who know someone in this situation, don't wait for them to ask for help. Most victims don't even recognize what's happening to them. Offer concrete support. Help them document. Connect them with resources. Sometimes the most loving thing you can do is refuse to accept the lies they've been taught to tell themselves. The system often fails us. Law enforcement doesn't always take financial abuse seriously. Family courts favor reconciliation over justice. Victims are blamed for not leaving sooner, not seeing the signs, not protecting themselves better. But we're not the ones who should be ashamed. The people who exploit trust, who steal from those who love them, who systematically erase their partners, they're the ones who should carry shame. I'm still learning what recovery looks like. Some days I feel strong and clear and proud of what I survived. Other days I feel broken by what I lost. Not the money, but the family, the future I'd imagined, the years I can't get back. Both things can be true. You can be a survivor and still grieve what was stolen. Thank you for staying with me until the end. Thank you for listening to a story that probably made you uncomfortable, that might have hit too close to home, that showed the ugly truth about how trust can be weaponized. If my story helped even one person recognize what's happening to them, if it gave even one person the courage to document or leave or fight back, then exposing all this pain was worth it. I want to ask you something. What city are you listening from? What time is it there? Are you alone or surrounded by family? I like to imagine all of you out there, living your lives, making your choices, hopefully learning from my mistakes. If this story connected with you, if it made you think or feel or recognize something you'd been ignoring, hit the like button. Let me know I'm not shouting into the void. And please, tell me in the comments, what would you have done in my place? Would you have confronted them publicly or privately? Would you have tried to salvage the relationship or burned it down completely? Would you have warned Sarah's husband what kind of family he married into? I honestly still don't know if I made the right choices. Maybe there were no right choices, only different flavors of loss. If you found this valuable, subscribe to the channel. There are more stories like mine, stories of people who survived what seemed unsurvivable, who found strength they didn't know they had, who rebuilt from ashes. And check out the other videos. There's one about a woman who discovered her husband's second family, and another about financial recovery after abuse. We're all in this together, navigating the messy reality of human relationships. Until the next story, take care of your heart, protect your resources, trust your instincts, and remember that it's never too late to reclaim your life. Never. I'm living proof of that. 62 years old, starting over, learning who I am without the weight of their lies. It's terrifying and liberating and lonely and free all at once.